Hello and welcome to eNCA Moneyline, your money guide. My name is Sikim Kabateli. Welcome to another special edition of the show. Today we discuss a topic that many of you will be familiar with but haven't added a name tag to it. It's called black tax. You can join the conversation on this topic on Twitter by hashtagging eNCA Moneyline, #Black Tax. And joining me for this discussion is social commentator Eusebius Mkeza and Africa Rethinks Ayabonga Tawe. But first, as South Africans commemorate Workers' Day, millions of working class South Africans have a special kind of tax to pay. It's called black tax. eNCA reporter Thabang Masanabo explains.
Pinky Nechibambe has been working as a scientist since 2007. But this mother of two does not get to exclusively enjoy the fruits of her labor. She also has to provide for her unemployed parents.
I'm the only one, so I have to make sure that every month after buying my groceries, I have to make sure that there's also grocery at home.
Nechibambe is one of millions of black South Africans who have to pay what's known as black tax. But just how much does it affect her standard of living? Well, let's say, for instance, that this burger represents her monthly salary. On average, just over 10% of her earnings go to her family, leaving her with this to meet her own needs. But what is this special tax?
If you bring a child to this world, you can't burden them to say, you must take care of me. Yes, they can support you, but even in the taking care of you, it must be negotiated.
Nechibambe says she pays black tax because she can't just stand by while her parents drown.
You want to help them, but it's also strenuous on you because you also have to take care of yourself.
She's not the only one. After long hours at work, Tapo Kanaga splits his salary with his family. He's currently renovating his mother's kitchen, paying his sister's university fees, and buying groceries for the family. All this while paying to complete his own studies and support his daughter. Kanaga has been the man of the house since his father died 15 years ago. He hasn't been able to move out of home yet. He simply can't switch off his responsibilities.
When you take the family responsibilities and stuff, and afterwards you have to focus on yourself.
If this burger represents Kanaga's salary, more than 70% goes towards paying his black tax.
It puts so much strain in the relationship with the people that one has to support. There's a lot of resentment that is unspoken.
But there is hope.
We've learned lessons, we now are better off in a better position, that the black tax thing won't affect our kids.
While this generation feels indebted, many black taxpayers believe the future looks brighter. Thabang Masanabo, Centurion.
Eusebius and Ayabonga, thank you very much for joining me today. I wonder if I had to ask you how much of that burger would be left over. If you had to calculate your black tax, Eusebius, how much would be left over?
I don't know if there is a burger at the moment. It depends which month you ask me, Siki. Some months there'll be half left, sometimes a quarter, but also sometimes there'll be absolutely nothing, especially if you're self-employed, as I am. So the picture is actually worse than what Thabang was suggesting, and I'm not sure if it will get better in the future because the structural reasons that explain black tax will take a long time to wipe out.
Absolutely, and Ayabonga, we laugh about it, right? Because I suppose it's either you laugh or you cry. But this is a very serious thing.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to what Eusebius was saying, I think if you look seasonally, there's certain elements and times in the year where the black tax tends to be more than at other times. And it speaks directly to some of the structural inequalities that we have.
Yeah.
So in a sense, when we laugh at it, we're not really laughing at it out of mirth or anything like that, but we're actually laughing from a place of sadness because it's a reality for most young black professionals in South Africa. I mean, if you look in January, school fees need to be paid, university fees need to be paid, as Mr. Kanaga said in the insert. And then if you go towards the end of the year, there's certain things that you need to be paid forward, especially around Christmas time. And then think of all of the other things that happen during the course of the year. There's funerals for our uncles, there's a wedding, there's increasingly now, I mean, for me, imisebenzi and works sort of rituals that need to be done. And in a lot of instances, the responsibility is also placed on your shoulders because now you work and you also need to contribute. And it's no longer a matter of saying that, hey, we've left you out of the calculation now because you have no source of employment.
And why do we call it a black tax? I mean, surely this affects other races that are poor, or does it not?
No, Siki. I mean, any white person who's watching this show must just not have FOMO about this tax. Honestly, it's not a nice tax to have, so don't desire to have it. If you don't have it, count your blessings. But the reason has to do with intergenerational wealth. The truth of the matter is that, firstly, we have bigger families than white people, extended families. Everyone is a family member. And in addition to that, you don't start with a positive bank balance once you become a professional as a black person. So even if you go and work at a top company like R&B or McKinsey, I've heard some very talented black professionals telling me about black tax that they have, and white colleagues who go, "How? There's a funeral this weekend, why are you not flying to Mthatha?" Well, you've got to take the Greyhound because the rest of the money has to subsidize the funeral. So I've had one white friend of mine on Facebook saying, "You CBS, I have the same phenomenon. It's called my daughter and I have to give her money." It's not the same thing. If we list the things Ayabonga is talking about, you will see the structural differences between black life and the lives of white people.
And that real impact on young professionals, and I want to talk about that because Eusebius makes the point that when you start to work, you're not walking in there already having maybe a car from daddy, having your mom paying for your first month's rental or anything like that. It's almost like there's an expectation that the moment you get your first paycheck, maybe even half of it goes back home.
Look, I mean, there's a lot of people that have really sort of worked with empirical studies behind some of these questions. If you look at Stellenbosch, Servaas, Van der Berg, and a range of other academics there, looked at the difference between consumption patterns of black communities and white communities in the same income levels. And one of the things that they found was that there was a significant asset deficit in black communities. So what you find is that when I start off working, I don't have the car, I don't have the furniture, I don't have the house, I don't have all of these things. And therefore, for the first, say, 5 years of my professional life, a lot of my money is going to have to be dedicated to actually acquiring these assets. Whereas some of our white counterparts don't necessarily face that kind of burden because you get a car from home or you get to inherit a house, or you tend to get a better starting point as a professional than you would in black communities, because the biggest challenge, as you said, is that we don't come from this kind of money. So in many ways, we're a first generation that's really having to take the slack of all of the asset deficits that we've accumulated over.
But do you think it's going to end though? Because in the insert we hear from one of the subjects in the insert saying our children are not going to have to worry about this.
I think that's too quick. It's too optimistic. I'm sorry. I know it's Workers' Day and we'd like to liberate workers, but it's compounded by two things, Siki. Firstly, and I really shouldn't laugh because it's horrible for all of us as black professionals. In addition to the black tax that is about other people in the family, we also live ostentatiously to show that we've arrived. So I have to drive a BMW. I can't be seen coming in my Fiat to a Chisanyama. So that additional burden means that the black tax just keeps growing. And the second factor that compounds it, certainly speaking for myself, is that we have very low levels of financial literacy, even if you had a BCom or business science degree. So you've got this money for the first time. No one else in your family had money before. What do you do with it? And many people watching this program who are even financial advisors have got horrible personal habits when it comes to this. And that's part of the reason why I think it will take much more than optimism for this to be wiped out.
Interestingly, when I speak to my African American friends, they define black tax as the fact that black people have to work harder, twice as hard, 3 times as hard, to be seen to be even close to being equal to their white counterparts at work. That for them seems to be a big issue. That's an issue here?
I think those personal barriers are there, but I think one of the most important things we need to look at are the structural barriers. So if you look at a job seeker who comes from sort of the north, who's maybe perhaps white, and you compare that job seeker to someone who comes from Soweto, and you look at the kind of obstacles that person needs to overcome to just get into the city to a job interview, for instance, then you can already begin to see that it's not only at a household income that the black tax actually plays itself out, but also in terms of the spatial and the structural planning of our society.
Because they have to travel further to get to work.
Exactly, and this is why there's a study that's gone out now from JPAL looking at whether or not a transport subsidy for job seekers would actually have an impact of actually lessening the costs of getting into the employment market, because that's in many cases a factor that we don't look at.
And that's not considered, I suppose, even by recruitment, the recruitment industry, or even your boss, the fact that you had to wake up at 4 and get there. So before you've even started work, you're already tired.
That's absolutely true. And I think there's a gap in the market here in terms of financial advisory services.
Yeah.
I had to persuade my personal banker, private banker, that it is okay for me to care about my sisters and how we structure my financial affairs. And the reason is that he doesn't have black tax, and he thought that it's prudent advice to tell me that one should only care about your wife and kids at most, but certainly not extended family. So I think the financial industry itself isn't geared towards this. But the other thing we can do without even being experts on finance, Siki, is that it just starts amongst us as friends. The next time Siki says, you know what, I'm done with my Mini, I need the latest gadget on the market, you should, as friends, keep each other in check and honest and say, it's okay. I mean, I know what you're going through, I'm suffering as well. So as black people, between ourselves as professionals, we can do a lot more to scaffold each other and to keep each other real.
What should we do you think?
I think conspicuous consumption is a major problem. Although I think it's going to be very difficult to have frank discussions with some of your friends who tend to sort of keep these things to themselves. There's a psychological element in a lot of us, especially as young professionals, to actually say, have I made it? I actually think I have made it, and there's certain things that I need to buy to actually show in an outward way that I've actually made it. So I think there's that challenge, and I think overcoming that challenge largely requires a combination of dealing with the psychological issues, but also the financial education and literacy issues that we're talking about.
All right, a good point to leave it, because we're going to be talking about those psychological effects in a moment. You see, Bismarck is a social commentator, and Ayabonga Kawa, who is with Rethink Africa. So after the break, we're going to be talking about the psychology of black tax. You're watching eNCA Moneyline, your money guide. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now joining me in studio is political scientist Lindiwe Makunga and clinical psychologist Mteto Chemese. Don't forget, you can join in the conversation on Twitter by hashtagging eNCA Moneyline, hashtag Black Tax. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me today. We spent some time talking about the financial implications, defining what it is, but I really want to get into what the psychological impact of something like this is. In the insert, you talked a bit about the resentment that can come with it.
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with young people taking care and assisting their families or their loved ones or their parents even. But once it becomes an expectation because we've invested in you, then it comes a lot with resentment. And usually people feel guilty about what they feel because they feel their lives cannot move because they have to take care of the family. Sometimes they have to even start by building houses. And like our colleagues were talking about, I mean, the structural violence that took place in South Africa, when people talk about apartheid, we forget the residue that we have in terms of our identities, in terms of the economics, you know, religion, politics, entertainment, all those things, they have intergenerational impact. So some of what we are seeing is actually as a result of that.
Okay, and we're going to explore that a little bit more, but I just wonder, Linda, if you think we think very much when we are planning as a country, as we're trying to deal with our multiple challenges, if this is something that even factors into that kind of planning?
It really doesn't. It doesn't at all. And I think it's very interesting when you talk about a lack of skills. And I mean, I remember the comment that Tito Mboweni made about his complaint that not enough economists want to work for government and not enough economists are doing research, etc. They're going for more corporate jobs. And that plays a huge role in just our development as a country and the individual decisions that you make as a black professional and the jobs that you take. I know that there's an expectation that I need to, as soon as I get a qualification, I need to be, giving money back, I need to be buying groceries, I need to be helping my parents out. I'm not going to go and work for government. Instead of going, You're
going to look at what the salaries say.
Exactly. And inevitably I'll end up taking skills away from my country. And going and working for a private company.
And there was also a few years ago a big discussion about job hopping amongst black professionals, going for the money rather than developing themselves and developing their skills in one company or in one division, for example. So there's an actual absolute impact on the kinds of skills that we're going to have for the future if we continue to be chasing the money because we have to do this instead of actually thinking about what kind of development we're having for the country.
I think the sad thing, if you think about, I mean, we often talk amongst ourselves as psychologists that one of the things we don't talk about as a basic requirement is like eating. Collectively, a lot of black people have never had the luxury to eat to enjoy food. They've had to eat to fill the stomach. It's similar to, you know, as my colleague was saying, if you have to work to earn more money, we also have materialism in this country. Democracy also played this big role of us saying, okay, there are these possibilities. And there's a lot of pressure, and we have to take individual responsibility as well, because sometimes I look at myself. I worked for 7 years before I could have a car. I had to drive a 1985 Ford Pandam as my first car, which I got home. It had pressure on me because that's not the car my peers were driving at the time. I look at the car I bought the first time. With hindsight, I shouldn't have bought that car. So there's a lot of things that happen for us to overcompensate for some of the things and how we define success. And I think, but then government has to actually support us even in terms of education. You can't have a situation where people are not aware of how they could plan their lives, how much they would earn, what their responsibilities are. And we're quite an excessive country in South Africa. I mean, wherever I've traveled, whether abroad or even in the African continent, I'm shocked at the number of German cars that are on the road within a few distance compared to other countries. So we don't really need to do those kinds of things. But then again, they are based on what we define as success. But we have to be responsible as well for our financial literacy. And people, when they work to chase the money, it doesn't build your career as well. You know, if I'm a prospective employer and you come to me, I've got 2 candidates, you've just been job hopping, chances are I'm going to look at you as a risk factor. But how many people are actually engaged in that, even at university, you know?
Absolutely. What sort of limitations does it place then on black professionals as well, as you are particularly entering the employment space?
Oh, the limitations are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm about to get my PhD, and this journey in academia has been a journey that, I mean, at times it's been harrowing, in terms of the fact that I didn't have my parents to support me. I couldn't call mommy or daddy and say, you know what, Wits or the university that I'm at, or Cape Town or wherever, is not paying my fees, or they are paying my fees, but I need money to live. I didn't have that call to mommy and daddy. And that has made it so difficult in the sense that when you look at the number of black South Africans who've started and abandoned PhDs because they just couldn't afford to continue studying and
live
and live and have their financial responsibilities. So I mean that impact has been personally very difficult for me, because I've literally had to make money appear from nowhere. And it's strange for me because they tell you there's a shortage of black academics, and they're doing everything possible to make it this an attractive career path, and yet it is so difficult because we don't have that support system. When, you know, by the time we actually enter this career path, our parents are retirement age, they just don't have that extra money. And it really does affect.
And they're often supporting other family members as well. So you are now, you are almost seen as we're done with you. Now give back while we push up more and more. What does this kind of thing do for a young professional? I mean, I read, I've heard stories of young people getting an internship, for example, but then obviously they can't travel there. They have to spend their stipend on the travel, trying to get the right clothes for the job. They don't have access to data or computers. So even with having the internship, the tools for them to actually make it, a worthwhile exercise just don't exist.
Well, I mean, it's a collective experience, and I think we need to be careful not to sound like there are no white people or other races that are actually struggling with the same. But collectively, black experiences remain very, very, very difficult. If you take university or college students, when they get NSFAS, most of the students, they actually have to buy food at home. They don't have to think about the books that they need to buy and all those kinds of things. So when we talk about the black tax, it's just a burden of being black in a system where, because of the intergenerational poverty and the struggle that we come from, it's interesting you're talking about the PhD. I've had to put mine on hold because as much as I'm excited, I'm like, yo, wait a minute, I've got to support 13 family members. And my supervisors don't understand that. But the point is, our government has to also consider this thing of developing people. Sometimes we talk about infrastructure development, which is important. I feel one thing we haven't done very well in South Africa is to actually develop the human beings. Some of the things that we see that are happening in various communities, they speak to the fact that we have not been empowered enough to actually be able to handle our lives and to navigate the system.
Absolutely. So human capital development, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.